Hello all, it is the week of August 9th, 2022, and from Locus, the magazine of science fiction fantasy, I'm here to tell you about all the new science fiction, fantasy, and horror books that are coming out this week. So you can be the smartest kid on the block, not that you weren't already. I have 8 fantasy titles, 3 science fiction titles, and 2 horror titles, all available now from various book publishers. Let's start with the fantasy. There's so much of it this week. From best-selling author Wesley Chu, we saw The Art of Prophecy in hardcover, ebook, and audio from Del Rey. This is the first book in the War Arts saga trilogy about what happens when a prophesied hero is not the chosen one after all, but still has to try to save the kingdom anyway. Naomi Novik, New York Times bestselling author of A Deadly Education, described it like this: an ambitious and touching exploration of disillusionment in faith, tradition, and family, a glorious reinvention of fantasy and wuxia tropes. From Sunyi, we saw The Book Eaters in hardcover, ebook, and audio out from Tor Books. Fabian Schweizer at Grimdark Magazine said this about it: The Book Eaters by Sunyi starts with a 29-year-old being refused booze at a corner shop because she doesn't have ID. As a young-looking 29-year-old who still gets carded on a regular basis, that made me fall in love with the book instantly. But Devon isn't your ordinary woman. She is a book eater. Humanoid, but not human. They devour books as sustenance. I mean, that's the famous old quote, right? When I get a little money, I buy books, and if any is left, I buy food and clothes. We know our priorities. From Naseem, Jamnia, we saw The Bruising of Qilwa in trade paperback and ebook from Tachyon. This is a fantasy novel. A non-binary refugee practitioner of blood magic discovers a strange disease causing political rifts. Locus reviewer Gary K. Wolfe says this: The Bruising of Qilwa is the first novel by non-binary Persian-American author Naseem Jamnia, who last year received the first Samuel R. Delany Fellowship, sponsored by Capstone Books, to recognize SFF writers from a community that has been traditionally marginalized in speculative fiction, according to their website. I mean, let's get in the weeds about what traditional means in this context for like just a second, because even if we don't know what the reasons are, and we should just keep doing what they're doing because clearly they were sensible at some point, but what are traditional is mostly just dumb stuff that we haven't thought about or didn't have any power to control in the first place. Anyway, from Adam Levin, we saw Mount Chicago in hardcover, ebook, and audio from Dutton. Kirkus described the plot like this: after a huge swath of downtown Chicago is swallowed up by a freakish sinkhole, an acclaimed Jewish novelist who had a brief run as a stand-up comic and an obsessive fan who becomes a mayoral aide confront their losses. The book has been getting a lot of attention from outlets like the Chicago Tribune, the New York Times, and other places. Esquire said this: the maximalist novel, also referred to as the systems novel or the mega novel, towers, it looms, it stands upright on the bookshelf and intimidates readers, daring them to endeavor to understand and finish. I think the fantasy lingo for this is the doorstop novel, by the way. Anyway, Esquire goes on to say, these works begin in earnest in post-World War II America with novels like William Gaddis's The Recognition and Thomas Pynchon's Gravity's Rainbow, and all share certain qualities: Stefano Ercolino's phrasing, length, encyclopediaism, exuberance, polyphony, paranoia, ethical commitment, and hybrid realism. In other words, they're long, dense, and ambitious, told from numerous points of view, interested in morality, awash in conspiratorial machinations, and framed in a narrative filled with over-the-top characters and unlikely scenarios. Look, we'll let you decide what counts as an unlikely scenario. I think that writer might underestimate our tolerance for unlikely. From Ellie Modesitt Jr. in Tor Books, we saw Councilor in hardcover, ebook, and audio. The author describes it like this: while marketing pitches call the series gas lamp fantasy, I describe it as high-tech coal power, because in the world of Gildor, the Empire of Gold, electricity is not technically possible, and thus illumination is by gas lamps, kerosene lanterns, or candles, but industry is coal-powered. This book is second in the Grand Illusion series. M. Bijman at 7 Circumstances said this: usually you are happily reading along, another lunch, another set of correspondence to process, some repartee between the characters, hey-ho, when suddenly Avral would say something to Stefan, like, on your right. Stefan would spot a would-be assassin, and before the person even has time to get off a shot, you'd have one of Stefan's throwing knives in him, and a vital body part crushed by a blow from Stefan's truncheon. From Leslye Penelope, we saw The Monsters We Defy in trade paperback, ebook, and audio out from Red Hook. Noah Fromm at Bookpage called it like this: author Leslye Penelope successfully blends a folkloric sense of the supernatural derived from sources such as Ethiopia's Kibra Nagast with a Gatsby-esque vision of the Roaring Twenties in Washington, D.C.'s African-American community. Replete with historical figures including a youthfully insouciant Langston Hughes, the unflappably paternal Carter G. Woodson who founded the Journal of Negro History, and even a cameo from W.B. Du Bois. The Monsters We Defy is a fascinating blend of the real and imagined. And the author is interviewed in the August issue of Locus, where she describes her character like this. I like Clara in The Monsters We Defy because she's nothing like me. She's choleric, her temper is quick, and she doesn't suffer fools. She's not the nicest person you'll ever meet, but she has a good heart. She's really in touch with her own anger in a way that I admire a lot. I like prickly people. I suspect that you feel that you're getting the truth with them. They're not sugarcoating things. I wanted to write someone who was difficult. From Kelly Robeson, we saw High Times in the Low Parliament in trade paperback, ebook, and audio out from Tor.com. This is a historical fantasy novella set in a magical 18th century London with flirtatious scribes, irritable fairies, and endless debates at Parliament, where a hung vote will cause Parliament to flood and the return of endless war. Locus reviewer Gary K. Wolfe says it could be that what modern fantasy needs from time to time is a good jolt of old-fashioned goofiness. Few ideas I've seen recently are as goofy as the notion of trying to weave a romantic fairy fantasy around the struggles of a legislative body that can't get anything done because of arcane voting procedures. This is basically the premise of Kelly Robeson's delightful High Times in Low Parliament, set in an alternate London of what appears to be the early 18th century. It sounds perfectly reasonable to me to flood Parliament if they can't get their act together. Here we go again, trying to decide what's reasonable and what's unreasonable. I just think the baseline of what we're used to is so unreasonable that unreasonable ideas like flooding Parliament start to sound really rational. Quickly now I'll tell you about a science fiction novel as well from Katelyn Monroe Howes. We saw The Awoken in hardcover, ebook, and audio from Dutton Books. Publishers Weekly called it like this: Outlaw resurrectionists bring 23-year-old Alabine Rivers back to life 101 years after she died from cancer and had her body frozen in 2020. Reanimation has been declared illegal, and the Awoken are killed on sight in the reformed United America. Finally, we'll speed up a little from here because this is a little more reasonable than it was last week, but still a lot. From Sarah Adlakha, we saw Midnight on the Marne in hardcover, ebook, and audio. This is an alternate history / time loop fantasy novel. From Allyson Dahlin, we saw Cake Eater in hardcover, ebook, and audio. This is a young adult SF novel reimagining the life of Marie Antoinette in 3070. From Britney Lewis, we saw The Undead Truth of Us in hardcover, ebook, and audio. This is a young adult zombie horror novel. Teen black dancer Zari sees her mother turn into a zombie. From Rokeya Hossain, we saw Sultana's Dream and Padmarag in trade paperback, ebook, and audio. This is an omnibus of 2 feminist utopian stories by a pioneering feminist in India at the beginning of the 20th century. Sultana's Dream is about a Muslim woman in an early 20th century India who falls asleep and wakes in a future where men, not women, run the home. Novella Padmarag is a feminist and anti-colonial take about a woman-run school and welfare center. From Brielle D. Porter, we saw Jester in hardcover, ebook, and audio. This is a young adult fantasy novel. Lisette's father was executed for assassinating the king, leaving her alone, disgraced, and without the magic she was supposed to inherit. From Kate Alice Marshall, we saw These Fleeting Shadows in hardcover, ebook, and audio. This is a young adult horror novel with a queer romance about a young woman who will inherit a fortune if she can stay at the ancestral home, Harrowstone Hall, a place that haunts her dreams. And in case you missed it, we'll tell you about Gallant by V.E. Schwab, out from Green Willow Press in hardcover in March 2022, with a cover by David Curtis. From Colleen Mondor's review in Locus, Victoria Schwab's Gallant is a dark confection, a tale that shares tropes with Gothic classics, a curse, ghosts, a house of faded glamour that is shrouded in mystery, and pins its hopes for a happy ending on a tortured heroine who is haunted by the secrets of a past she never knew. There's a terrible orphanage, the Maryland School for Independent Girls, which is really, in the words of our heroine Olivia, an asylum for the young and the feral and the fortuneless, but our protagonist sounds like the type to make her own fortune. So that's all the books we've got for you coming out this week. If that subscription button is still red, do us both a favor and make it gray. All of these shaggy dog jokes we come up with might have convinced you already, but we're trying to do something nice for you. Help us, help you, keep it going. Like and subscribe. That's the ask, and we're gonna keep asking. Every week is a new chance to get it right and help us out. We are at Locus Mag or at Locus Magazine on most platforms. And if you'd like to know more about Locus Magazine, we cover SF, fantasy, and horror, and YA books that are coming out. We do monthly book reviews, commentary columns by people like Cory Doctorow. We cover books written in English and books translated into English. We list all of the forthcoming titles from publishers so you know months in advance what's about to come down the pipeline. We interview authors, talk to artists, we report on writers' workshops and conventions, and the magazine's been doing that sort of stuff since 1968. Our readers include industry pros, librarians, booksellers, professional writers, and serious readers, people who like to know about what's going on in publishing and what's about to happen next. Go check us out at our website, www.locusmag.com. You can subscribe to the print magazine. Locus is available in a digital edition, or you can donate to what we do via Patreon or direct donation. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. Come back and see us again soon, and we'll be here next week with more new books. You hear the coffee shop in the background? They've been measuring beans out there, man.